Hello and a very warm welcome to a brand new episode of World Panorama, the only show that gives you a 360-degree view of major global news. I'm Sana Khan. Before we get you detailed reports, here's a look at the top stories this week. Marking 50 years of the Indo-China war, World Panorama takes a look at the ties marked by friction over territory, the Tibet question and the Indo-US ties. Polls after debate number 2 show Obama has a slight edge over Romney, both candidates back on campaign trail before the finale. Airstrikes killed dozens in northern Syria. Turkey, along with Syrian opposition groups, back ceasefire call during Muslim holiday. And Lance Armstrong continues to lose endorsement deals over doping charges, stands to lose $30 million as sponsors' fee. And straight to the story in focus this week. 50 years after the 1962 war, India has fashioned a hard-headed model of cooperation with China, placing economics over politics. But it has to bolster its diplomatic game and military capability to deal with an assertive Beijing. The bitter memories of the 1962 war that India lost still loom over the strategic community and the collective public consciousness. But that has not stopped the Indian establishment from following a multifaceted policy of engagement to deal with Beijing. Tensions remain over a host of issues, including border incursions, Chinese visa policy for Indians from Jammu and Kashmir, and Chinese claims over Arunachal Pradesh. The scenarios of rivalry, mostly emanating from Western think tanks, have found greater amplification in the media and strategic communities of both the countries, which see each other as a principal strategic threat. In today's scenario, where most certainly the trust deficit isn't wholly bridged, what is it that India should be looking at in dealing with China? Because looking at China, the strategy has to be a well-thought-out one. To give us insight into our top story this week, I'm pleased to welcome Commodore Uday Bhaskar. Thanks so much for joining us. He is Director for the Society for Policy Studies, or the SPS. He has also held several important posts, and one of being the Director of the IDSA. Thanks once again for joining us. Before I come to you, why don't we have a look at this report?
Tensions over a host of issues including border incursions, Chinese visa policy for Indians from Jammu and Kashmir, and Chinese claims over Arunachal Pradesh continues to serve as grim reminders of the Indo-China war. Beijing lays claim to 90,000 square kilometers of land in India's northeast and cites the region's cultural affinity with Tibet. As evidence, the area forms part of what it calls southern Tibet. India sees China as backing rival Pakistan. Beijing, on its part, is suspicious of New Delhi's growing ties with the United States. China has vastly improved roads and infrastructure on its side, facilitating its military movements, and has placed advanced nuclear-capable intermediate-range missiles in the Tibetan area.
On the one side, we are strengthening our capability in the border. Other side, we have established a border mechanism, border management mechanism with China that is now functioning satisfactorily.
India is in the midst of a 10-year plan to scale up its own defences in the northeast, in which it will add some 60,000 troops to the 120,000 already in the region and modernize Second World War era air bases.
If the border disputes have not been settled, then you cannot know the intention of the other side. It can change at any point of time. Therefore, we have to be prepared so that the other country does not target our nation. We were not prepared in 1962. Our approach was incorrect and therefore we were defeated. This should not be repeated again. All possible steps should be taken and full preparation should be made.
In 2008, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh visited Arunachal for the first time and promised $4 billion to build rail and road infrastructure set to make troop movement easier.
All right, coming to our guest now. It's been 50 years, Commodore Bhaskar, since the war has taken place. Now, India for the first time goes out, the minister, and pays homage to the martyrs. Do you think it symbolized something? How do you look at, 50 years of the war back home?
If we review the recall of 50 years and the way in which India has looked at this or approached it, I think perhaps the most significant development has been what happened on Saturday morning, when the Defence Minister, Mr. Antony, accompanied by the 3 service chiefs and the Marshal of the Air Force, the Venerable Arjun Singh, laid a wreath at India Gate to pay homage to those who had died in that war. And I thought that it was very significant. Some people have described it as a gesture of epic proportion, mainly because for 50 years, the Indian state was in what you might describe as collective amnesia, meaning we did not want to revisit any aspect of that war.
Right.
And that is the reason where I felt that it was a very brave decision by Mr. Antony. And perhaps it's a coincidence that he is one of our senior cabinet ministers from Kerala. And much of the trauma and the humiliation of 1962 could be laid at the door of Mr. Krishna Menon, who also was a very senior cabinet minister from Kerala. Not that it's relevant because he had a Maharashtra, Bombay affiliation.
Right.
But I felt that this was a very significant gesture, a positive development, that India is now in a position to revisit and recall 1962, hopefully in an objective manner, so that we can learn the right lessons. So that's far as the Indian state is concerned. As far as civil society, and you spoke about the collective consciousness of India, it was very instructive for me as a student of this particular war and higher defense management in India to see how over the last 2 or 3 months, there has been a general outpouring trying to remember various facets of the war, those who had a personal recall, who were professionally involved or associated either as military people, as diplomats, as journalists. There was a very, very candid recall, and I think an attempt to try and analyze what led to the war. And that is where I think we have some very important cues, lessons about how we deal with China.
Right.
And we know what happened over the last 50 years. I think both sides have to draw the appropriate lessons to manage a very, very complex relationship in the next 15 or 20 years.
Right. Because we've seen, in the recent past that just boosting of trade ties does not really mean that the two nations are at peace with each other. They can be, doing millions of dollars in trade, but not really be at peace as far as these issues that we're seeing, the border disputes. So, strategy-wise, do you think that is the core area where India should be looking at,
Sana, what you're saying about trade is absolutely right, because there is nothing to say that if two countries have a robust trade and economic relationship, that their security and strategic orientation would be very stable.
Right.
I mean, case in point is China and Japan. They have a bilateral trade that goes into billions of dollars. Now, in likewise, you see China and the United States.
Right.
They have a huge trade relationship. As a matter of fact, the United States is in debt to China. That does not prevent the prickliness or the kind of tension we saw as far as China and Japan were concerned. So for India, I think there is a lesson there that while you progress and move ahead on trade and economic issues, and there I do want to add a caveat, the trade relationship is very asymmetrical. It's in China's favor. They are providing high-end products to India. We are exporting natural resources. It's almost like saying primary products, mineral ore and so on. So we need to address that. But concurrently, I think for India to have a stable and positive relationship with China on the strategic front, on the security front, we need to do 2 things.
Right.
One is to enhance our own comprehensive national strength in every aspect of the nation's muscle, if you will, and also engage in very candid talks with China. Because there are 2 points here. Over the last week, 10 days, there's been a certain constituency in India which has engaged in what I might call as a bit of China bashing. And some very extreme words were used. I think that is not prudent.
Right.
Because if you look at the big picture, India and China have actually engaged and displayed in what you might call as strategic restraint. Yes, there is tactical provocation, what you spoke about earlier, visas, presence of Chinese troops in POK, and incursions across the line of actual control and so on. But when it comes to the really big issues, the political leadership in both sides have exercised this restraint. We have to see how the new leadership in China, after the 8th of November, there is the transition. Will they also maintain the same orientation? But we need to increase our comprehensive national power, because at the end of the day, there is this old adage that strength respects strength. In 1962, we did not pay attention to comprehensive national power. That is why we were subjected to that humiliation. And I think these are the lessons of October 1962, which we are now recalling, I think, in a more positive way than we were able to do in the past.
Right. So these are some of the crucial lessons that India for sure has learned from the 1962 war. It wouldn't be wrong to say that it was the time when India actually thought about modernizing its military and, you know, the political rise that took place after that. Thanks so much, Commodore Uday Bhaskar, for joining me this week on the show and sharing your perspective. With that, we take a very short break. Another report on China coming up, the latest GDP numbers for China and what they mean for the economy. Stay with us. You're watching World Panorama. China's economy slowed for a 7th straight quarter between July and September, but despite missing government targets for the first time since the depths of the global financial crisis, other data released pointed to a mild year-end rebound. China's economic slowdown comes as its leaders are preparing for a sensitive once-in-a-decade leadership transition that will start a Communist Party Congress from 8th of November. China's economy slowed for a 7th straight quarter in July-September, missing the government's target for the first time since the depths of the global financial crisis. The National Bureau of Statistics on Thursday said that GDP grew 7.4% in the third quarter from a year earlier, the first miss of the official target since 6.5% growth in the first quarter of 2009.
This is the result of the continuing underlying influence of the international financial crisis. China's external demand is getting increasingly smaller, which is placing a lot of pressure on China's economic growth.
While GDP growth at 7.4% would be cause for joy in recession-stalked developed economies, it represents a sharp slowdown for China, where GDP grew 9.2% in 2011 and has averaged at annual rate near 10% for 3 decades.
Our national economy is showing a clear stabilizing trend. Looking at the fourth quarter, investment, consumption, imports and exports are all seeing positive changes. The growth in the first 3 quarters was 7.7%, which has laid a very good foundation for meeting the target for the entire year.
During recent talks on economic conditions, Premier Wen Jiabao said China's economic growth had started to stabilize and witness positive changes with the economy running well into quarter 3. Some analysts do endorse his view.
Looking ahead, it actually is maybe signaling that the worst is behind. The third quarter may have been the low. We had a bounce in industrial production growth in September that was reported today. And we also had those strong export numbers for September released over the weekend, last weekend. So those are, to me, are signaling that globally, I think there is some merit to consider that perhaps pent-up demand has been released.
Few forecasters are predicting a rapid recovery on the lines of 2010 when GDP growth leapt to 10.4%. Beijing is proceeding carefully with its policy interventions, aiming this time to support its own economy first. But much still depends on global conditions, like a new Eurozone crisis, plunging Western Europe into recession and hitting imports from China would be a big blow to China's factories. And as the IMF warned last week, world financial markets remain fragile, overshadowed as they are by the dangers coming from the Eurozone. President Barack Obama and Republican presidential nominee Mitt Romney faced off on Tuesday in the second of the three nationally televised debates. This forum contained far more confrontation than the first, with the candidates occasionally lapsing into arguments. Though debates have rarely affected the outcome of US presidential elections, but this year may prove to be an exception. Here's how Obama may have managed to bounce back to take the lead.
Particularly as I was serving as governor of my state, because I had the chance to pull together a cabinet, and all the applicants seemed to be men. I went to a number of women's groups and said, can you help us find folks? And they brought us whole binders full of women.
This off-the-cuff comment by Mitt Romney about women job applicants went viral online on Wednesday. The gender row threatens to complicate the Republicans' push for a key segment of the electorate and offered US President Barack Obama a boost as he sought to stem Romney's recent polling surge ahead of the November 6 election. President Obama also referred to the binder comment during a campaign stop in Iowa on Wednesday.
I've got to tell you, we don't have to collect a bunch of binders to find qualified, talented, driven young women ready to learn and teach in these fields right now.
Earlier in round 2 of their debate, Barack Obama aggressively challenged Republican Romney on jobs, energy and Libya in their second debate early on Wednesday as the Democrat tried to reclaim the momentum in a tight White House race.
There was no demonstration involved. It was a terrorist attack, and it took a long time for that to be told to the American people.
And the suggestion that anybody in my team, whether Secretary of State, our UN ambassador, anybody on my team would play politics or mislead when we've lost 4 of our own, Governor, is offensive.
Both candidates roamed the stage to talk directly to the questioners. At times they circled each other warily at center stage like prize fighters, talking over each other and bickering frequently about the rules and who had exceeded their time. Romney accused his rival of overseeing a stagnant economy.
He's great as a speaker and describing his plans and his vision. That's wonderful, except we have a record to look at. And that record shows he just hasn't been able to cut the deficit.
What he says is he's going to make sure that this doesn't add to the deficit, and he's going to cut middle-class taxes. But when he's asked, how are you going to do it, which deductions, which loopholes are you going to close, he can't tell you. Taking that off the board.
Several polls taken in the moments after the debate gave the president a slight advantage. A wide majority of Americans believe Romney won the first debate on October 3rd, and the Republican challenger had been gaining in public opinion polls since then. Most recent polls show the two candidates almost even. Obama and Governor Romney will meet in one final debate on foreign policy issues next Monday in Florida.
Over in Syria, international peace envoy Lakhdar Brahimi arrived in Damascus Friday for talks with Syrian officials on securing a temporary ceasefire in the 19-month-old conflict between Syrian forces and rebel groups. The peace envoy is pushing for Syrian officials to support a ceasefire during the 4-day Muslim holiday of Eid al-Adha that begins 26th October, a call that Turkey has backed. Here's more.
Plumes of smoke were billowing in the Syrian town of Haram near the border with Turkey on Friday as fighting between pro-Syrian government forces and opponents of President Bashar al-Assad continued. One video shows what appears to be a government fighter jet crossing the sky over homes, followed by an explosion that could have come from a dropped bomb. Other shows rebel fighters battling government troops on the ground amid heavy destruction. Turkey, a major regional player in the Syrian crisis, threw its diplomatic weight on Friday behind a call for a ceasefire at least through a 3-day Islamic holiday beginning next week. The appeal by Turkish Foreign Minister came as Brahimi prepared to visit Damascus to press his earlier entreaties for the guns to fall silent on both sides during the Eid al-Adha holiday starting Thursday. This after UN Arab League envoy to Syria expressed his concern over the continuing conflict, reiterating his warning that the civil war may no longer be contained within Syrian borders.
وإذا كان تم
The invitation, if successful, will allow us to build upon it a real truce, holding all fire and eventually a political process which will help the Syrians solve their problems. This conflict, if it continues, will not be limited to the Syrian borders.
Getting Turkey's backing now may be important because the authorities in Ankara are critical allies of the rebels seeking Assad's overthrow. Before visiting Damascus, Mr. Brahimi has been seeking support for the idea of a temporary ceasefire from the regional powers including Iran, Mr. Assad's main backer in the area.
Chanel comes out with a new campaign for its newest fragrance featuring Hollywood heartthrob Brad Pitt. More on that after this short break. Thanks for staying with us. Time now to take a look at some of the other international news in a quick wrap. Here's Globe Watch.
European Union leaders took a big stride towards establishing a single banking supervisor for the Eurozone, opening the way for the bloc's rescue fund to inject capital directly into ailing banks. 27 leaders agreed at a Brussels summit to adopt a legal framework by the end of this year, giving the European Central Bank overall responsibility for banking supervision. The main beneficiaries of direct recapitalization are likely to be Spain and possibly Ireland too. Protesters and police officers faced off during a large rally in the Greek capital on Thursday, where crowds of thousands staged a demonstration against plans by the government to change labour conditions and cut wages in the latest round of debt-cutting austerity. Police used pepper spray and tear gas on protesters, hurling homemade petrol bombs and stones at officers. Mired in its worst downturn, Greece is readying 11.5 billion euros of cuts to appease the so-called Troika. NATO Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen met with Afghan President Hamid Karzai on Thursday and said NATO is committed to the 2014 pullout of foreign troops. He added that NATO will continue its support to Afghanistan after the troops' withdrawal. Rasmussen said NATO will ensure that the insurgency will not gain ground in Afghanistan. Karzai said Afghanistan no longer needs a foreign presence but welcomed international observers.
Well, if you've missed the week's biggest sporting events, here's your chance to catch up. We get you sports action. Lance Armstrong has lost 3 of his main sponsors as the fallout continues from the United States Anti-Doping Agency's report into doping. Sportswear giant Nike, cycle maker Trek and Budweiser brewer Anheuser-Busch will cut ties with the former cyclist. Armstrong, who has been stripped of his 7 Tour de France titles, has also stepped down as chairman of his cancer charity Live Strong. The decisions come a week after USADA released a report containing accusations of widespread doping by Armstrong and his teams. France substitute Olivier Giroud headed past a diving Iker Casillas with almost the last touch of the game to snatch a 1-1 draw against world champion Spain in their World Cup Group 1 qualifier on Tuesday. Giroud's fine effort after he had been on the pitch a matter of minutes denied the Spanish a 25th straight win in major championship qualifiers. Sergio Ramos had put Spain deservedly ahead in the 25th minute. Spain could have doubled their advantage before half-time were it not for France goalkeeper Hugo Lloris, who saved a poorly struck Cesc Fabregas penalty. Williams F1 development driver Susie Wolff left behind the computer simulator on Wednesday to drive the real thing on the Silverstone track for the first time. The Scot drives in the German touring car series during the race season but also works at Williams F1 driving numerous laps around the world circuits on team's sophisticated simulator. Wolff is the second woman to drive Formula 1 in the test role this season. Chelsea captain John Terry has been banned for 4 domestic matches and fined £220,000 after the English Football Association found him guilty of racial abuse. Terry appeared before an FA disciplinary hearing over charges that he racially abused Queen Park's Rangers defender Anton Ferdinand in a Premier League match last October. The 31-year-old retired from England duty on Sunday ahead of the FA hearing, saying his position in the national team was untenable because of the disciplinary proceedings. Time now for all the very latest news from the world of movies and lifestyle. Here's our entertainment wrap.
South Korean singer Psy performed his hit song Gangnam Style on the 7 Network Sunrise Breakfast Show on 17th October on a stage set up in Sydney's Central Business District. Psy, who's taken the pop world by storm and has got almost 500 million YouTube hits, did his foot-stomping horse dance in front of hundreds of fans in Martin Place. Stars including Helena Bonham Carter, Andy Serkis, Simon Pegg and Michelle Rodriguez put on a glittering show at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London on October 16th. The actors attended a special dinner in celebration of the launch of Hollywood Costume, a major new exhibition which showcases more than 100 items. Tyler Perry is normally a one-man force of nature in Hollywood, writing, directing and starring in his own movies. Still, his turn as an action film star in Alex Cross, which premiered in Los Angeles on Monday night, was a bit of a surprise. The film follows the young homicide detective from the worldwide best-selling novels by James Patterson as he meets his match in a serial killer. Chanel unveiled its latest No. 5 advertising campaign on Monday, featuring the man its creative director calls the sexiest man in the world, actor Brad Pitt. Looking thoughtful against a grey background, the 48-year-old Hollywood star ponders life in a short video directed by Joe Wright.
That's all we have for you in this edition of World Panorama. I'll be back next week, same time, with more world news. Till then, you can join us on Facebook and Twitter for the latest updates. This week, we wrap up helping you relive the moments from Felix Baumgartner's supersonic jump. Felix jumped from a capsule this time, 24 miles above Earth, landing safely on ground. Goodbye and thanks so much for watching.